Hey guys, I want to show you the Google Doc system I use for recording wrong answers and past scores with students so that you can copy it and track your progress the same way. Now, there's a quote that I love, which Tony Robbins will talk about, which is, you cannot manage what you do not measure. And so in this process, you're going to see all the things that we measure with students. And by the more details of the process, without going overboard, that we can measure, the more you are going to notice progress and therefore naturally just put your attention on the fine points of what it takes to improve. And recording wrong answers, by the way, as well, is just such a good way to catch your old mistakes, realize the learnings, and then stop making them going forward. And in another video, I'm actually going to combine this old wrong answers recording method, which a breathwork approach that you might want to combine as well. And students seem to really like it, actually. It just puts so many good components together for you. You'll see what I mean. So here's the first thing: is we look at the student's results in this document. You'll see her very first test, an SAT she took in January, and you can see what did she get on verbal, what did she get on math, how many right and wrong did she get in the reading section, the grammar section, and the math. And then she's got a few mock ACTs here. And you can see here, she's just gradually progressing. She had basically a 30.75 when we average her 4 ACT section scores there. Then, 10 days later, she's up to a 31. And then she's up to a 31.25 a couple weeks after that. So even though it's all a 31, technically a 30.75 is a half point higher, a half point lower than the 31.25 that she was at later that month. So you can see the granular progress that went into this. She's getting a 36 in English no matter what, but math has gone from 27 at the beginning of December to a 30. Reading still to 31. Science looks like from 29 to 30 to 28. Overall, though, she's added a half point to her score. And when that comes down to having a 33.25 versus 33.75 later on, it's going to be the difference between ultimately showing colleges a 33 or a 34. It's a much different score. 34 is basically a 1500 on the SAT, whereas a 33 is like a 1450. So big difference. All right, so in the grammar section of these tests, you can see at this point, she just gets everything right. She's mastered all the skills, 36, 36, 36. She doesn't get questions wrong anymore. She literally loves doing these sections now because she's gotten all the grammar rules and the techniques so well down. But if we go back to the beginning of her grammar process, you can see she started out getting a 30 with 9 questions wrong, finishing with 5.5 minutes left. And gradually, as she's doing each of these next sections, getting 7 wrong, finishes with 10:50 left. Then she is getting 5 wrong, 6.5 minutes left. Then she's getting 2 wrong for 35 with 4 minutes left. So gradually, we're just seeing her get more and more accurate. 2 wrong, 6.5 minutes left. Then she does an SAT grammar section. This first SAT grammar section that she got 4 wrong. 10 minutes, 11 minutes basically left at the end. Does an ACT, gets her first perfect 36 with 12 minutes left at the end. 1 wrong for 35 here. Three wrong in an SAT grammar section. Then she gets a perfect 44 out of 44 on grammar. Now she's perfect on ACT English. So you're seeing her progress, test by test by test. And we're recording all these details. Now, let's show you the nuts and bolts, the specifics of what we're recording. Top of the page. So we write TOTP. It stands for top of the page note. And that is 1 or 2 techniques. Every time she sits down and does a grammar section, she's going to focus on just one or two techniques. And so for her, at this point, all she's doing, she's literally saying, it says, say the letters as I circle my answer. So she's just working on that practice of when she bubbles in, 15 is C. She's saying that sentence in her mind so that she never misbubbles. 16 is F. 17 is G. So that approach, and she's just practicing that particular skill. And she's also practicing when she sees an independent clause, dependent clause, we call those IC/DC questions. She's labeling to the left and right of the comma. Is it IC or DC? And then applying the grammar rule she's learned so well. These are later on skills. And you'll see that earlier in her tests, we're actually focusing on different skills that she would write down at the top of the page before she did the section. She's been working on labeling IC/DC questions for a while, but let's say on transition questions, she's going to put her own word in for the transition. That's part of the predicting technique on transition questions. But we also mentioned other techniques that she is practicing. Maybe that we've talked about that were top of the page notes earlier on in her process, but now we're just checking in, seeing if she's doing these techniques as well, even though the real focus of this particular section she did, which she wrote down at the top of the section before doing it, was to label IC/DC questions, put in her own word on transition questions. But we're checking in on these other questions too. These other techniques as well. So every time you do a section, you might want to write down not just how many out of 44 or 75 did you get right on SAT or ACT, but how much time was left at the end. And what were her top of the page notes that we wrote down? This test, we were practicing the deep breath after every question, labeling IC/DC questions. Clearly something she's working on and getting better at. Transition questions, rhetoric, underline the key phrase questions. We are spelling out these particular techniques on each test she did until we know that this particular technique has been drilled into a habit. And at that point, we know she's doing it every time she does a section. We don't even have to talk about it. This might look like a lot of different techniques that we're paying attention to. Most important, as always, are the two top of the page notes, which we wrote down here. And we checked in, 0 to 10. How well are you doing these techniques? And if you're just an 8 out of 10, what do you think would have made you a 10 out of 10 on this technique? And we're even noticing, hey, last time it was just a 5 out of 10, but here's an 8 out of 10. If you want to go into that depth of the techniques in 0 to 10, how well are you practicing them? You can bet that by noticing you're just an 8 out of 10, you're even starting to think of the fine points. Ooh, what could I have done to be a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10? And now your attention is on improvement. This is what happens when you measure these finite details of your section and are looking at, hey, how can I do them even better? And so what I would say is the bare minimum. When you write in your score, I would write your score into a Google Doc like this and put in, hey, which test did I did? What was the date? How many out of 75? Let's say if it's ACT English, did I get right? What score is that? How much time is left at the end? What are my top of the page notes? What are those two techniques that I was practicing throughout this section? And hey, if I could put my attention on other techniques as well, let's write those down. Let's check in 0 to 10. Where am I on them? And then let's put in the learnings. In other words, what are the questions I got wrong and what can I learn from each one? And so we've actually copy pasted using screenshots. What were the questions I got wrong? What were the answer choices? What was the right answer? And in yellow here, light yellow, what was the learning I can take from this question? And I'll show you in another video how to review these wrong answers periodically. Actually, every time she does a next section, just for a few minutes, we have her scroll through these old wrong answers, reread the readings, and it just reminds you, reread the learnings, and it just reminds you, hey, what are the techniques I'm working on? What are the mistakes I was making in the past? And when you do this, you can see why she's so freaking good now at grammar. She's gotten all these techniques drilled into habits. So that now, when she has a section, perfect scores. 44 in a row right there, 75 in a row right there. What's that? Add those up, 105, 109 questions in a row correct. Our next section, just one wrong. So add another 44 to 109. We're at, I think, 158, and she's got 157 of them correct. And she gets 75 out of 75 correct. Here, it's a 36. Another 75 in a row, another 75, another 75. So add all that. 159 plus 150 plus another 150, 159 plus 300, 459 questions, and she got 458 of them in a row correct. That's another 15 out of 15. So now she's at what? 474 questions in a row and 473 of them right. When you're just putting your attention on all these wrong answers, what was the learning? What are the techniques I'm practicing? 0 to 10, how well am I doing on them? This level of depth, you're going to get this freaking good at these sections, and she just loves doing them now because she gets everything right. Her technique is so good. So that's a little sense of how to do it on grammar sections. Let's look at her math. Very similar. What was the test you did? What were the top of the page notes that you wrote down before doing it? And here she's just doing 41 to 60. She's just working on the hardest ones. And we're copy-pasting the question itself. What was the right answer? What was the learning? And before she does her next math section, she's going to scroll through these previous wrong answers in the math. And she'll be like, oh, yeah, that question. Oh, that's the learning. That's the technique I should have used. And we're just catching all the wrong answers from her practice. What was the learning? What was the type of question? And before she does her next math section, she scrolls through these old wrong answers that she got, remembers the learning. She's going to be way less likely to make these mistakes again going forward. And it's a way of just catching all the little learnings and wrong answers from your practice, maybe from the tutoring if you're working with a tutor too, and just catching everything that otherwise would have fallen through the cracks. Because you know that experience where you have looked at wrong answers, gotten a learning, but then not looked at it again for 2 months, and then you forget the learning. And you can get the question wrong 2 months later. But with this practice of catching the wrong answers, recording the details from each section, recording what the learnings were from each wrong answer, she's not going to make these wrong answers anymore. That's math. Math is basically just how many right, how many wrong, how far, how much time is left at the end of the section, or hey, on this one it looks like she only got up to number 56. She left 4 questions blank at the end. If you're working with a tutor, really good idea with math wrong answers. I have all my students do this. Reattempt any wrong answers before the next session with the tutor. See how many of the ones you got wrong you actually know how to do. And then with the tutor, and that precious time you have with the tutor, where you're spending your parents' hard-earned money most likely, only go over the questions that you had to look at twice before you knew how to do them. And those are the good ones to work on in session time. And also, who's a good source of free learnings on these math questions? Bring these questions to a good friend who explains things well and knows how to do these questions, or to your teacher's office hours. And take care of as many of these questions as you can with your friends or in office hours before you bring them to your tutor, whose time you have to spend money to get with them. All right, that's how you go through wrong answers in math and how you create that log. And you just screenshot of the question. If you work with a tutor, you can kind of include whatever notes they put in the screenshots as well. And she just gets to go through all these wrong answers, remember them, remember the learning. And it's like, yeah, she's not going to make these mistakes anymore by continually reviewing these wrong answers and the specific techniques that she learned from them. Reading section, similar. Put in the specific test you did. How many out of 40 did you get right? How much time was left at the end, or what question did you get up to? And you can see she put her top of the page notes here. And these are specific techniques we've talked about that she is working on in her sections. Not as much to focus on in reading. There's just not as many, honestly, with every question in reading. It's just a question of, if you got it wrong, it's the same approach to every passage and every question. So there's not as much in terms of specific learnings to put, but you can do it. In this earlier SAT, we wrote out, okay, these are the questions you got wrong. These were the learnings from these questions. Good thing for her to review before she does each of her next reading sections. Let's look at science. If you're doing the ACT, here's what it looks like to record wrong answers in science. Name of the test, how many right and wrong, how'd your timing go, what did you write down for top of the page notes. I like to track, just like in reading, I like to track, okay, how many of them did you get right versus wrong? How long did the passages take? And that's a way so that she can start getting really aware of her timing. And we might put in, from the sessions, we might put in what the learnings on the questions are, which ones she got wrong, screenshot of the question, what's the right answer here? And in this session, what did we find were the learnings from each of the wrong answers that she can take with her going forward. Before she does her next science section, she's going to scroll through these wrong answers, remember the question, remember, oh, that's why that answer's right, and what's this particular learning that she could get from that question that she's going to apply going forward. And you'll see, as you do this, your accuracy goes up, the time it takes you to go through the sections gets quicker, and the quality of your technique gets better. So really just recording all these details, and it comes back to you cannot manage what you do not measure, and what you measure improves exponentially. That's the second part of the quote. So we want to measure all these details. It'll put our attention on managing them and improving them, and then your results are going to improve exponentially. And that's it. So good luck. Record your wrong answers. Record the learnings. If you can, screenshots of each question you got wrong. Scroll through these before you do your next section so that you can apply better technique on each section. Write down 1 or 2 techniques that you're really focusing on every section. You don't just want to bang out sections. You want to be working on something really precise and specific and drilling it into a habit before you then put your attention on the next technique that you're going to drill into a habit. And that's what really raises your score over time. All right, guys, thank you and good luck.